I never believed in ghosts until I worked the graveyard shift at McDonald's on Elm Street. That old building had been there since the 70s, and everyone in town had heard the stories, but I thought they were just urban legends told by bored teenagers. It was November 2018, and I desperately needed the job. My girlfriend was pregnant, and we were behind on rent. When my manager offered me the overnight position, I jumped at it. The pay was decent, and how hard could it be? Just me, maybe one other person, and the occasional drunk customer wanting nuggets at 3 in the morning. My first week went smoothly. I worked with Sandra, a woman in her 50s who'd been doing nights for years. She taught me the routines, showed me how to clean the fryers, and warned me about the quirks of the old building. The lights in the walk-in cooler flickered constantly, the ice machine made sounds like someone was trapped inside, and the drive-thru speaker sometimes picked up radio signals from the police scanner. But Sandra never mentioned what happened when you worked alone. The night it all started, Sandra had called in sick, leaving me by myself for the first time. The manager, Kevin, assured me it would be fine. Just keep the doors locked after midnight, take drive-thru orders, and call if anything crazy happens, he said before leaving me with a pat on the shoulder. The first few hours passed normally. A few late-night customers came through the drive-thru, mostly delivery drivers and people getting off second shift. By 2 in the morning, the traffic had completely died down, and I found myself alone in that fluorescent-lit building, surrounded by the hum of refrigeration units and the occasional car passing on the street outside. That's when I heard it for the first time. A whisper. It was so faint, I almost missed it, coming through the drive-thru headset. At first, I thought it was just static or maybe a radio signal bleeding through, but as I listened more carefully, I could make out words. "Behind you," it said. My blood ran cold. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there, but the restaurant was empty. All the lights were on, every corner visible. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. I tried to rationalize it. Old equipment, radio interference, my imagination running wild in the middle of the night. But the whisper came again, clearer this time. "I can see you."
This time, I ripped the headset off and threw it on the counter. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called Kevin, and went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. What manager answers their phone at 2:30 in the morning? I thought about leaving, just walking out and never coming back. But I needed this job. I needed the money. So I took a deep breath, put the headset back on, and tried to focus on cleaning tasks to keep my mind occupied. For the next hour, everything was quiet. I started to relax, convincing myself it had been my imagination or some kind of equipment malfunction. I even managed to joke about it to myself. Great, now I'm hearing things. Pregnancy stress is making me paranoid. Then, at exactly 3:45 in the morning, the drive-thru sensor chimed. Someone had pulled up to the menu board. I looked at the monitor that showed the drive-thru camera, but the screen was black, just static. "Welcome to McDonald's," I said into the headset, trying to keep my voice steady. "How can I help you?" The response made my knees weak. "I'm hungry," came the whisper. But this time, it wasn't distant or faint. It sounded like someone was speaking directly into my ear, their breath hot against my skin. I yanked the headset off again and ran to the drive-thru window. I peered out into the darkness, looking for a car, but there was nothing there. The parking lot was empty, illuminated only by a few streetlights that cast long, distorted shadows. But as I stood there, pressing my face against the glass, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Wet footprints. Leading from the drive-thru speaker to the window where I was standing. But here's the thing that still haunts me. It hadn't rained in 3 days, and the concrete had been completely dry when I'd taken out the trash earlier. The footprints were fresh, still glistening under the parking lot lights. And they were wrong somehow. Too long with what looked like claw marks at the end of each toe. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't through the headset. It was coming from right behind me. "Turn around." I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, feeling like something was breathing down my neck. The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 20 degrees in seconds, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me.
Finally, somehow, I found the courage to turn around. Nothing was there, but on the freshly cleaned counter, Written in what looked like condensation were 2 words: "Get out." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my keys, left everything exactly as it was, and ran from my car. As I fumbled with the door handle, I heard one final whisper, seeming to come from all around me. "See you tomorrow night." I drove home doing 90 miles an hour, called in sick the next day, and quit by text message the day after that. Kevin was furious, said I'd left the restaurant unlocked and unattended, that he'd have to write me up and probably couldn't give me a good reference. I didn't care. Some things are more important than money. But here's the part that still keeps me awake at night. A month later, I read in the local newspaper that they'd found something during renovation work at that McDonald's. When they pulled up the flooring in the kitchen, they discovered the remains of a homeless man who'd apparently died there years earlier. The article said he'd been missing since 2003, and no one knew how his body had ended up beneath the restaurant floor. His name was Marcus Webb. He'd been known around town for talking to himself, whispering constantly. People said it was mental illness, but now I wonder if maybe he'd heard the same whispers I did. Maybe some of us are just more sensitive to what lingers in places where people have suffered and died alone. I never went back to that McDonald's, even as a customer. They closed it down 6 months later for extensive renovations, but as far as I know, it never reopened. Sometimes, when I'm driving past that empty lot late at night, I swear I can still see lights on inside the building that isn't there anymore. And if I roll down my window, sometimes I can hear it. That same whisper, carried on the wind. I'm still hungry.
Being a single mother isn't easy, especially when your 5-year-old daughter has more energy than a nuclear reactor. That's why, on that rainy Thursday afternoon in March 2019, I found myself at the McDonald's on Riverside Drive, watching Emma climb through those plastic tubes like a monkey, while I tried to finish grading papers for my 3rd grade class. The play place was nearly empty that day. Just Emma and 2 other kids, a boy about 7 and a girl maybe 6. Their parents sat at tables nearby, absorbed in their phones like most of us do these days. I'd chosen a corner table where I could keep one eye on Emma and one eye on my work, red pen in hand, correcting math problems, and trying not to think about the bills waiting at home. Emma had been playing for about 20 minutes when I noticed him. He was sitting alone at a table near the playplace entrance. No food in front of him, no children with him, just sitting there watching. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and khaki pants that had seen better days. His hair was thinning, and he had the kind of pale complexion that suggested he didn't get outside much. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he'd already eaten and was just taking a break from the rain. But as the minutes ticked by, I began to feel uncomfortable. His eyes never left the play area, and there was something about his expression, intense, focused, almost hungry, that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my ex-husband's recent threats about custody had made me overly suspicious of every strange man I encountered. But maternal instinct is a powerful thing, and mine was screaming at me to pay attention. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up, and I could see he was pointing it toward the playplace, taking pictures or recording video of children, of my daughter. My blood went cold. I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound caught the attention of the other parents, but the man didn't even flinch. He just kept his phone trained on the play area, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Emma," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come down here, sweetie. It's time to go." "5 more minutes, Mommy," she called back from somewhere deep in the tube system. "I'm playing Princess Castle with the other kids." The man's smile widened. He stood up from his table, still holding his phone, and began walking slowly toward the playplace entrance. My heart started racing. There was something predatory about the way he moved, like a cat stalking prey. "Emma, now," I said more firmly, moving toward the play structure myself. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a small gap between two of the tube sections, a maintenance access panel that had been left slightly open. The man was heading directly for it. I ran. "Excuse me," I shouted at the man. "What are you doing?" He froze, his hand just inches from the access panel. Up close, I could see details that made me even more terrified. His fingernails were dirty and bitten down to the quick. There were food stains on his shirt. And his eyes, God, his eyes had a vacant, disconnected quality that reminded me of documentaries I'd seen about serial killers. "Just watching the children play," he said, his voice soft and almost childlike. "They're so beautiful when they're happy." Other parents had noticed the commotion now. The father of the 7-year-old boy stood up, his phone call forgotten. The mother of the little girl was calling her daughter down from the tubes. "Emma," I yelled, no longer caring about making a scene. "Get down here right now." I could hear her little feet scrambling through the tubes above us. The man took a step closer to the access panel, and I realized with horror what he was planning to do. He was going to climb into the play structure, with the children inside. "Get away from there," I screamed, grabbing his arm. He spun around, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. The vacant expression was replaced by something much more sinister: rage, frustration, and something else I couldn't quite identify. But that made every survival instinct in my body scream. "They need to come down eventually," he whispered, so quietly that only I could hear him. "I can wait." That's when I saw it. A small digital camera hanging around his neck, almost hidden beneath his shirt. The lens was pointing up toward the tubes. Emma's head appeared at the bottom of the slide. She looked confused by all the commotion, her cheeks flushed from playing. She was so small, so innocent, so trusting. The thought of this man's hands on her, of what he might do. I've never moved so fast in my life. I scooped Emma up in my arms and backed away from the play structure, never taking my eyes off the man. The other parents were doing the same with their children, forming a protective circle. "I'm calling the police," the father said, his phone already in his hand. The man's demeanor changed instantly. The predatory smile vanished, replaced by panic. He started backing toward the exit, bumping into tables and chairs in his haste. "I wasn't doing anything wrong," he said, his voice rising. "I have a right to be here. This is a public place." But he was running now, pushing through the front door so hard it slammed against the wall outside. Through the window, I watched him sprint across the parking lot and disappear behind the shopping center next door. The police arrived within minutes. They took statements from all of us, reviewed the security footage, and confirmed what I already knew in my heart. The man had been filming the children. The camera around his neck had been recording the entire time, capturing footage from below as the kids played above. Officer Martinez, a kind woman about my age, told me they'd seen this before. "Predators target places where children are vulnerable," she explained. "Play places, parks, anywhere kids are distracted and parents might let their guard down. You did the right thing by trusting your instincts." They never caught him. Despite having his face on security footage, despite descriptions from 4 different witnesses, he seemed to have vanished into thin air. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 days later, I was picking Emma up from daycare when her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled me aside. "Has Emma mentioned anything about a man taking pictures?" she asked, her expression troubled. My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "He drew a picture today during art time. A stick figure man with something in his hands. She said it was a camera. She drew herself and other children playing, and the man watching them. When I asked her about it, she said it was the picture man from the playground place." Mrs. Rodriguez showed me Emma's drawing. It was crude, the way all 5-year-old art is, but unmistakably clear. The man was standing apart from the children, holding a rectangular object pointed at them. And in the corner of the paper, in Emma's careful kindergarten handwriting, she'd written, "He said he would see me again." I stared at that drawing for a long time, my hands shaking. Emma had never mentioned anything about the man talking to her directly. But somehow, during those terrifying minutes in the playplace, he'd found a way to speak to her without me noticing. We moved 2 weeks later. I found a new job in a different school district, enrolled Emma in a new daycare, changed our routines completely. I told myself it was an overreaction, that we were safe, that the chances of seeing him again were infinitesimal. But 6 months later, at a McDonald's 3 towns away, Emma tugged on my sleeve during lunch. "Mommy," she whispered, pointing toward the counter. "The picture man is here." I turned, my heart hammering, and there he was. Same clothes, same vacant expression, same camera around his neck. He was ordering food, acting like any normal customer, but his eyes kept darting toward the playplace where other children were playing. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called 911 while walking straight up to him. "I know what you are," I said loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. "And I know what you do." He looked at me with those empty eyes, and for just a moment, I thought I saw recognition. Then he smiled, that same predatory smile from months before. "Proof," he said simply. "You need proof." He was right, and we both knew it. Taking pictures in a public place wasn't illegal, even if the intent was disgusting. Standing near children wasn't a crime, even if every parent's instinct screamed danger. But this time, other parents had heard me. Other people were watching. And when the police arrived and ran his ID, they found something interesting. He was a registered sex offender, and being within 500 feet of a play area violated his parole. They arrested him on the spot. During the trial, we learned the truth. His name was David Morse, and he'd been documenting children at play areas across 3 states for over 2 years. His apartment was full of photos, videos, detailed notes about children's routines and habits. The prosecutor called it reconnaissance for future crimes. Emma's drawing was entered as evidence. A 5-year-old's stick figure art helped put a predator behind bars. But here's what still keeps me awake at night. In all those photos they found in his apartment, there were dozens of other children. Kids at parks, playgrounds, swimming pools, restaurants. All of them unaware they were being watched, documented, targeted. How many other parents missed the signs? How many other picture men are out there right now, sitting in playplaces and parks, watching our children with hungry eyes and patient smiles? Emma is 8 now, and she still remembers the picture man. Sometimes, when we pass a McDonald's, she'll ask if he's still in jail. I always tell her yes, that he can't hurt anyone anymore. But I know there are others out there. And I know that next time, we might not be so lucky. Trust your instincts, parents. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Our children's safety is worth more than being polite or avoiding a scene. Sometimes the monsters are real, and sometimes they're sitting just a few tables away, waiting for us to look away.
I've always hated public restrooms. The smell, the germs, the awkward silence when someone else walks in while you're trying to do your business in peace. But after what happened to me at the McDonald's on Highway 67 in the summer of 2020, I can barely bring myself to use any public bathroom at all. It was a Tuesday evening around 9 o'clock. I was driving home from visiting my sister in Springfield, about a 3-hour drive that I'd made countless times before. Usually, I could make it the whole way without stopping, but I'd been drinking coffee all day, and my bladder was screaming at me by the time I hit the halfway point. The McDonald's sat alone at a truck stop exit, one of those isolated places that cater more to long-haul drivers than families. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few 18-wheelers and a couple of beat-up cars. The building itself looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, with faded yellow arches and that distinctive red tile roof that's become almost nostalgic now. I pulled up to the front entrance, debating whether I should just find some bushes behind the building instead. But it was getting dark, and I'm not brave enough to squat in the wilderness where anyone could see me. So I gathered my courage, grabbed my purse, and headed inside. The restaurant was nearly empty. A tired-looking teenager worked behind the counter, probably counting down the minutes until closing time. There was one customer, an elderly man nursing a cup of coffee in a corner booth, staring out at the highway with vacant eyes. The whole place had that liminal, almost dreamlike quality that late-night stops tend to have. I asked the cashier where the restrooms were, and she pointed toward a narrow hallway near the back of the building. The lighting was dimmer back there, just a couple of fluorescent tubes that hummed and flickered occasionally. The men's room was on the left, women's on the right, with a janitor's closet between them. I pushed open the door to the women's restroom, and immediately my heart sank. It was one of those single-occupancy bathrooms with just a toilet, a sink, and a large mirror mounted on the wall above the sink. The floor was covered in that cheap speckled linoleum that shows every stain, and there was a persistent smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with something less pleasant. But I really had to go, so I locked the door behind me and tried to make this as quick as possible. The toilet paper dispenser was one of those industrial ones that never gives you enough, so I was standing there, pulling and tearing, trying to get enough to feel confident. That's when I first noticed something odd about the mirror. It seemed delayed. I'd move my hand, and my reflection would follow just a split second later, like there was some kind of lag. I told myself it was just the cheap fluorescent lighting playing tricks on my eyes, or maybe I was more tired from driving than I'd realized. I sat down to do my business, trying not to think about what kind of bacteria might be lurking on that seat, despite the toilet paper I'd carefully arranged as a barrier. That's when I heard it. A breathing. Not my breathing, I was holding my breath, trying to get this over with as quickly as possible. This was someone else breathing, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere in the room with me. I froze, listening intently. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the mirror, but that was impossible. I was alone in a locked bathroom. There was nowhere for someone to hide. The breathing continued, steady and rhythmic, and I started to panic. I finished as quickly as I could, pulled up my pants, and turned to face the mirror while I washed my hands. That's when I saw her. Standing behind my reflection, just over my right shoulder, was another woman. She was maybe in her 30s, with long, dark hair that looked wet, like she'd just gotten out of the shower. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like looking into two holes in her face. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. Just the empty bathroom, the flickering light, and the sound of that steady breathing. When I looked back in the mirror, she was gone. I told myself I was hallucinating. Too much coffee, not enough sleep, the stress of driving alone at night. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to calm down. But when I looked up into the mirror again, she was back, this time standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have been able to feel her presence. Her mouth was moving like she was trying to say something, but no sound was coming out. Her black eyes were fixed on mine in the reflection, and there was something desperate about her expression, like she was trying to warn me about something. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the mirror. The woman in the reflection mimicked my movements perfectly, but she wasn't copying me. She was moving independently, reaching out with pale hands as if trying to touch the surface of the mirror from the inside. That's when I realized the breathing wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the mirror itself, fogging up the glass with each exhale. I fumbled for the door handle behind me, but it wouldn't turn. The lock that had worked perfectly fine when I'd come in was now stuck, no matter how hard I twisted and pulled. The woman in the mirror was getting more agitated, pressing her hands against the glass, her mouth opening in what looked like a silent scream. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. My own voice coming from the mirror saying words I wasn't speaking. "Help me. Please, I can't get out." The voice was distorted, like it was coming from underwater, but it was unmistakably mine. And as I watched in horror, my reflection began moving independently from my actual movements. While I stood paralyzed by the door, my reflection was pounding on the inside of the mirror, mouth open in that same silent scream as the dark-haired woman. That's when I understood. The woman wasn't trying to get out of the mirror. She was trying to warn me that I was about to be pulled in. I felt a cold sensation starting at my fingertips, like ice water flowing through my veins. My vision started to blur around the edges, and the bathroom began to feel less real, like I was looking at it through frosted glass. The mirror was calling to me, pulling at something deep inside my chest, trying to drag my soul into that reflected world where the dark-haired woman waited with her black eyes and desperate warnings. With every ounce of strength I had, I threw myself at the door. The lock finally gave way, and I tumbled out into the hallway, gasping and shaking. The fluorescent lights seemed blindingly bright after the dim bathroom, and the normal sounds of the restaurant, the hum of refrigerators, the beeping of fryers, were like a symphony of reality welcoming me back. I ran to the counter, where the teenage cashier was cleaning the coffee machine. "There's something wrong with your bathroom," I said, probably sounding crazy. She looked at me with the kind of patient expression teenagers reserve for hysterical adults. "What kind of wrong?" I tried to explain, but how do you tell someone that their bathroom mirror is haunted without sounding completely insane? "The mirror," I said. "There's something wrong with the mirror." She sighed and walked back with me to investigate. But when we got to the bathroom door, I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. She went in, flipped the light switch a few times, and came back out. "Seems fine to me," she said. "Maybe the light bulbs going out makes everything look weird." But I saw her expression as she closed the door. For just a moment, she looked shaken, like she'd seen something she couldn't explain. I didn't wait around to find out what. I got in my car and drove the remaining 90 minutes home without stopping, even though my bladder was screaming at me again by the time I pulled into my driveway. That was 3 years ago, but I've never forgotten the woman in the mirror or the sound of my own voice pleading for help from inside the glass. I did some research afterward and learned that the truck stop had been built on the site of an old motel that burned down in 1987. 7 people died in that fire, including a woman named Patricia Morse, who was found in the bathroom of room 237, apparently overcome by smoke while trying to escape through the window. The newspaper article I found included a photo of Patricia. She had long dark hair and pale skin. In the black and white newspaper photo, her eyes looked like dark holes in her face. I think Patricia is still trying to escape, still trapped in that bathroom, warning other women about the mirror that pulls souls into whatever liminal space exists between reflection and reality. Maybe she saves some people, and maybe others aren't as lucky as I was. I drive a different route to Springfield now, one that doesn't pass by that truck stop. But sometimes, when I'm in my own bathroom at home, brushing my teeth or washing my face, I'll catch a glimpse of something in the mirror that doesn't belong. A shadow moving independently, a face that isn't quite my own, or the faint sound of breathing that isn't coming from me. And I wonder if Patricia followed me home, still trying to warn me about mirrors I haven't encountered yet, still fighting to save others from the fate that trapped her decades ago. These days, I try not to look too closely at my reflection, especially in dim lighting. Because sometimes, if you stare long enough into a mirror, something else starts staring back. And sometimes, that something has been waiting a very long time for you to notice it's there.
I used to think I was pretty street smart. Growing up in Detroit teaches you to be aware of your surroundings, to trust your gut when something feels off, and to always have an escape plan. But what happened to me at a McDonald's in Columbus, Ohio in October 2021 taught me that sometimes predators are more patient and calculating than any street thug I'd ever encountered. I was driving back home to Detroit after a job interview in Cincinnati. The interview had gone well, and I was feeling optimistic about my chances of landing this marketing position that could finally get me out of the retail hell I'd been stuck in for 3 years. It was around 7 in the evening, already getting dark, and I was hungry and tired from the 4-hour drive. I pulled into a McDonald's off Interstate 71, one of those newer locations with the modern design and digital menu boards. The parking lot was about half full, which seemed normal for dinner time. I found a spot near the front entrance, grabbed my wallet and phone, and headed inside. The restaurant was busy, but not packed. Families with kids, a few college students, some travelers like myself grabbing quick meals on the road. I ordered a Big Mac meal, found a table by the window where I could see my car, and settled in to eat while scrolling through job listings on my phone. That's when I first noticed him. He was sitting alone at a table near the back of the restaurant. No food in front of him, just a cup of coffee that looked like it had been sitting there for a while. What caught my attention was that he was staring directly at me, not glancing over occasionally like people do, actually staring with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He looked to be in his 50s, average height and build, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and a gray hoodie. Nothing particularly memorable about him, which somehow made him more unsettling. He was the kind of person who could disappear into a crowd, completely forgettable unless you were specifically looking for him. I tried to ignore him, focusing on my phone and my food, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. When I finally looked up again, he was gone. His coffee cup was still on the table, but his chair was empty. I felt a wave of relief, thinking maybe I'd just been paranoid. I finished eating, threw away my trash, and headed out to the parking lot. It was fully dark now, with only the restaurant's outdoor lights and a few street lamps providing illumination. As I walked toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me, matching my pace exactly. I turned around, but the footsteps stopped, and I didn't see anyone. The parking lot looked normal, a few people coming and going, cars pulling in and out. But the hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. I quickened my pace toward my car, fishing my keys out of my pocket. The footsteps started again, definitely following me now. I spun around quickly, hoping to catch whoever it was, but all I saw was the man from the restaurant standing next to a beat-up sedan about 30 feet away, pretending to look at his phone. My heart started racing. I'd parked near the front of the lot, under one of the brightest lights, specifically because I learned to be cautious, but now I was regretting not parking closer to the building entrance where there would be more witnesses. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking slightly. As I unlocked the door, I heard a car engine start up behind me. In the reflection of my car window, I could see headlights turning in my direction. I got in quickly and locked the doors, starting the engine as fast as I could. As I backed out of my parking space, I saw the sedan pulling out too, staying about 3 car lengths behind me. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. I drove toward the highway entrance, watching my rearview mirror. The sedan followed, maintaining the same distance. When I merged onto I-71 North, so did he. When I changed lanes to test my suspicions, he changed lanes too. This was really happening. Someone was following me. I tried to think rationally. Maybe he was just going in the same direction. Maybe I was being paranoid. But when I took the next exit, a random one I had no reason to take, and he followed me off the highway, I knew for certain I was being stalked. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I was in an unfamiliar area, driving through dark suburban streets with no idea where I was going. The sedan stayed behind me, sometimes dropping back when there were other cars around, but always maintaining visual contact. I pulled into a gas station, hoping the bright lights and potential witnesses would discourage him, but as I sat there, trying to figure out what to do next, the sedan pulled into the parking lot of a fast food restaurant directly across the street. I could see the driver's silhouette, still watching me. I called 911, but what could I tell them? A man was driving on the same roads I was driving on? I hadn't been threatened, hadn't been approached, hadn't even gotten a clear look at the guy's face. The dispatcher was polite, but essentially told me to call back if anything actually happened. That's when I remembered something my older brother had told me years ago. If someone's following you, never go home. Lead them somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses. I got back on the highway, but instead of heading north toward Detroit, I drove to the nearest police station I could find on my GPS. The sedan followed me the entire way, even as I turned into the police station parking lot. But here's the thing that still haunts me. He didn't drive away when he saw where I was going. He parked across the street and waited. I went inside and explained the situation to the desk sergeant, a middle-aged woman who took me seriously despite my lack of concrete evidence. She said they'd had reports of someone matching that description following people from various McDonald's locations in the area over the past few months. We think he's casing potential victims, lone travelers, people with nice cars, anyone who looks like they might be carrying cash or valuables. He follows them to learn their routines, figure out where they live or where they're staying. She had an officer escort me to my car and follow me to a nearby hotel where I decided to spend the night rather than risk the drive back to Detroit in the dark. The sedan was gone by then, but I didn't feel safe continuing my journey until daylight. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel early and drove straight home, taking a different route and stopping only for gas at busy stations where I could park near the front door. I kept checking my rearview mirror obsessively, but I didn't see the sedan again. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I was at work at the electronics store where I had been employed for the past 3 years. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon,
and I was helping an elderly customer choose a new tablet when I looked up and saw him. The same man from the McDonald's, wearing the same gray hoodie and baseball cap, browsing the smartphone display like any normal customer. But his eyes kept flicking toward me, and when he realized I'd spotted him, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predator's smile, cold and calculating. My blood turned to ice. He'd followed me home. He'd found out where I worked. This wasn't a random highway stalking. This was targeted harassment. I immediately called my manager over and quietly explained the situation. Store policy required us to call security if we felt threatened by a customer, and this definitely qualified. By the time security arrived, the man was gone, but the cameras had captured clear footage of his face. That footage led to his arrest 2 weeks later. His name was Robert Chen, and he'd been doing this for over 2 years across multiple states. The police found detailed notes in his car about dozens of potential victims, license plate numbers, work schedules, home addresses, daily routines.
My name was in those notes, along with my license plate, my work address, and the location of my apartment building. He'd been planning to escalate from stalking to something much worse. During the investigation, they discovered he'd been using McDonald's locations as hunting grounds because they were perfect for identifying travelers, people who were alone, far from home, and unlikely to be missed immediately if something happened to them. The prosecutor told me I was lucky. Other victims hadn't been so fortunate. There were 3 unsolved disappearances in neighboring states that they suspected were connected to Chen's activities. 3 people who'd made the mistake of eating alone at McDonald's locations, just like I had. Chen was sentenced to 8 years in prison for stalking and harassment, with additional charges pending related to the disappearances. But here's what keeps me awake at night. He's not the only one out there. The detective assigned to the case told me they see this more often than people realize. Predators who lurk in parking lots, following people home from restaurants, gas stations, shopping centers. They're patient, methodical, and they know how to stay just within the bounds of legal behavior until they're ready to strike. I got that job in Cincinnati, by the way. Took it partly because I wanted a fresh start somewhere Chen couldn't find me when he eventually gets out of prison. But even now, in a different city with a different routine, I'm hyper aware of my surroundings in ways I never was before. I park under lights. I check my mirrors constantly while driving. I never eat alone at restaurants near highways anymore. And whenever I see someone sitting alone in a McDonald's with no food, just watching other customers, I remember Robert Chen's cold smile and I call the police. Because the thing about predators is that they're everywhere, hiding in plain sight, looking like ordinary people until the moment they decide you're their next target. Trust your instincts. If someone gives you a bad feeling, don't ignore it. If you think you're being followed, go somewhere public and call for help. And never, ever lead a potential predator to your home. Sometimes paranoia isn't a mental health issue. Sometimes it's the thing that keeps you alive.
I've always been a night owl, so when my friend suggested a late-night food run to McDonald's after our gaming session went past midnight, I was the natural choice to drive. It was February 2022, and we'd been playing online tournaments for about 8 hours straight. My eyes were burning from staring at screens, my back ached from sitting in the same position, and honestly, the idea of getting some fresh air, even cold February air, sounded perfect. The McDonald's we usually went to was about 15 minutes from my apartment, located on the outskirts of town where the suburbs meet the forest preserve. It's one of those older locations, built back in the 90s when they still constructed restaurants in areas that seemed more rural than they do now. Over the years, the town had grown around it, but it still felt isolated, especially at night. My friends, Jake, Marcus, and Tyler, piled into my Honda Civic around 1:30 a.m., all of us craving Big Macs and fries after hours of junk food deprivation. The roads were empty, which wasn't surprising for a Wednesday night in February. Most sane people were home asleep, preparing for work the next day. As we pulled into the McDonald's parking lot, I noticed how eerily quiet everything was. The restaurant's golden arches glowed against the dark sky, and through the windows I could see the night shift workers moving around inside. There were maybe 3 other cars in the lot, which seemed about right for this time of night. But what struck me as odd was how close the tree line was to the building. The McDonald's had been built right up against the state forest preserve, and the woods came within maybe 50 feet of the back of the restaurant. During the day, you'd probably notice the trees and think it was nice, peaceful, natural. But at night, those woods looked like a solid wall of darkness, and you couldn't see more than a few feet into them despite the parking lot lights. We went inside, ordered our food, and found a table near the front windows. The night shift crews seemed happy to have some customers to break up the monotony. There was a manager, probably in her 40s, and 2 younger employees who looked like college students picking up extra hours. We were about halfway through our meals when Tyler, who was sitting facing the back of the restaurant, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "Guys," he said quietly, his voice tense, "look at the woods behind the building." We all turned to look through the rear windows, and that's when I saw it. Eyes. 2 glowing yellow-green eyes positioned about 8 feet off the ground, staring directly at the restaurant. They were too high up to belong to any normal animal, and they were perfectly still, like whatever creature they belonged to was just standing there watching us. Then,
"What the hell is that?" Marcus whispered. Jake, ever the skeptic, laughed nervously. "Probably just a deer or something, the lights reflecting off its eyes weird. But I'd grown up in rural Michigan before moving to the city for college. I knew what deer eyes looked like at night, and these weren't deer eyes. These were bigger, brighter, and positioned wrong. And deer don't stand perfectly still for minutes at a time just staring. The eyes moved. They shifted slightly to the left, as if the creature had turned its head, and then they began moving lower, like whatever it was had crouched down or was climbing down from something. But they never disappeared behind trees or underbrush. They stayed visible, floating in the darkness like 2 evil stars." "We should tell someone," Tyler said, but his voice cracked a little. "Tell them what?" Jake replied. "That we saw glowing eyes in the woods? They'll think we're high." That's when we heard it, a sound that I still can't adequately describe even 2 years later. It was like a cross between a growl and a whistle, low and resonant but with a weird musical quality that made it sound almost like speech. It was loud enough that we could hear it clearly through the restaurant's windows, and it seemed to go on forever, at least 30 seconds of this otherworldly vocalization that raised every hair on my body. The night shift workers had heard it too. The manager was looking toward the back windows with concern, and one of the younger employees had stopped what he was doing entirely, just standing there with a frozen expression. The sound stopped abruptly, and the eyes were gone. "Okay, that wasn't a deer," Jake said, his skepticism finally cracking. We sat there for a few more minutes, staring out at the dark tree line, but we didn't see anything else. The manager came over to our table. "Did you boys hear that noise?" she asked, trying to sound casual but obviously shaken. "Yeah, what was that?" I replied. She shrugged, but I could see the worry in her face. "Probably just a coyote or something. We get wildlife back there sometimes. The woods are protected land, so animals wander through." But her explanation didn't match what we'd seen or heard. Coyotes don't have glowing eyes 8 feet off the ground, and they definitely don't make sounds like what we just experienced.
We decided to finish our food and leave. As we were gathering our trash, Tyler grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing toward the back windows. The eyes were back, but this time they were closer, much closer. They were right at the edge of the tree line now, maybe 20 feet from the building, and they were moving back and forth like whatever creature they belonged to was pacing. "We need to go," I said, "now." We headed for the exit, but as we reached the front door,
One of the young employees called out to us. "Hey, wait up," he said, jogging over. His name tag read Connor, and he looked scared. "Are you guys driving around to the back of the building for any reason?" "No, why?" I asked. "Because whatever's out there, it's been coming closer to the building all week. Last night it was scratching at the back door, left marks in the metal." My stomach dropped. "What kind of marks?" Connor pulled out his phone and showed us a photo he'd taken. Deep gouges in the steel back door, arranged in sets of 4 parallel lines. Claw marks, but bigger than anything I'd ever seen. Each individual mark was at least 6 inches long. "Management says it's probably a bear, but I've never heard a bear make sounds like that thing makes. And bears hibernate in February, don't they?" We thanked him for the warning and headed outside to my car. The parking lot felt different now. Exposed. Vulnerable. The woods seemed to press closer, and every shadow could be hiding something watching us. As we walked across the asphalt, I kept glancing toward the back of the building, half expecting to see those yellow-green eyes emerge from the darkness. We were almost to my car when Marcus grabbed my shoulder. "Don't look back," he said urgently. "Just keep walking. It's following us." Of course, I immediately looked back. The creature had emerged from the woods and was standing in the parking lot behind the McDonald's. In the ambient light from the restaurant, I could finally see what we'd been dealing with. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with a body that seemed part human and part something else entirely. Its limbs were too long, its torso too narrow, and its head was shaped wrong, elongated like a wolf's skull stretched vertically. Its skin looked dark and mottled, and patches of coarse hair covered its arms and shoulders. But the worst part was how it moved. It didn't walk like an animal or a human. It glided, its feet barely seeming to touch the ground, covering distance with an unnatural fluidity that violated every law of physics I understood. And it was definitely following us. We ran.
I fumbled with my car keys, hands shaking while the guys piled into the Honda. The creature was halfway across the parking lot now, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I got the engine started and threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as we backed out of the parking space. Through the rear window, I could see it clearly now. It had stopped directly under one of the parking lot lights, and for just a moment, it looked almost human. But then it raised its head and let out that same musical growl we'd heard inside the restaurant, and I could see rows of teeth that definitely didn't belong to any human being. I floored the accelerator and we shot out of the parking lot onto the main road. In my rearview mirror, I watched the creature stand there under the light, perfectly still, until we turned a corner and I couldn't see the McDonald's anymore. None of us spoke for the entire drive home. What could we say? We'd all seen it, all heard it, all experienced something that shouldn't exist. When I dropped each of them off, we just exchanged nods and see you laters, like we'd silently agreed not to discuss what had happened until we'd had time to process it. The next day, I called the McDonald's to ask if everything was okay. The day manager told me they'd found the back door completely destroyed, not just scratched, but torn off its hinges entirely. They were closed for repairs and were installing security cameras around the entire building. A week later, I drove by during the day to see if they'd reopened. The McDonald's was gone. Not closed, not under renovation, completely demolished. The lot had been scraped clean, and there was a for sale sign where the golden arches used to stand. I asked around town, but nobody seemed to know why it had been torn down so quickly. The official story was structural damage, but that didn't explain why they demolished a building that had been fine just days before. Jake, Marcus, Tyler, and I never went back to that area after dark. We found a different McDonald's for our late-night food runs, one that was surrounded by strip malls and suburbs, far from any woods or dark places where things might be watching. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and I pass a McDonald's that's built too close to the tree line, I find myself checking the woods for yellow-green eyes. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I see them. The thing is, I don't think what we saw was unique to that one location. I think there are things living in the spaces between civilization and wilderness, things that are drawn to places where humans gather late at night when their guard is down. McDonald's restaurants, gas stations, truck stops. These are the modern equivalent of ancient crossroads, places where travelers stop to rest and refuel, unaware that something might be watching them from the darkness beyond the lights. So, the next time you're at a late-night McDonald's and you notice how quiet it is, how isolated it feels, take a moment to look at the shadows beyond the parking lot lights. And if you see eyes looking back at you, don't assume they belong to anything you'd recognize from a nature documentary. Some things are older than our cities, older than our roads, older than our understanding of what's possible in this world. And some of them are still hungry.